Hello and welcome. I'm Thomas Porteous and you are watching The World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top headlines of the hour. Chinese President Xi Jinping is set to meet South Korean President Lee Jae-myung on the final day of the APEC summit, his first visit to South Korea in over a decade. The G7 energy ministers condemn Russia's attacks on Ukraine's energy infrastructure, calling them devastating and unjustified. Kyiv labels the strikes as nuclear terrorism, saying they threaten millions as Moscow intensifies drone and missile attacks on power facilities. The Red Cross says it has transferred 3 sets of unidentified remains to Israel, which are still being examined and may not belong to missing hostages. The handover follows Israel's return of 30 Palestinian bodies to Gaza, marking another step forward in the fragile ceasefire, despite deadly strikes this week. President Donald Trump says he is not planning military strikes on Venezuela, despite a large US buildup in the Caribbean. The comment contradicts earlier remarks as the US deploys warships, fighter jets and troops near the Venezuelan coast. President Trump says he doesn't want Americans to go hungry and is ready to fund food aid if courts give legal clearance during the government shutdown. Trump says lawyers are reviewing how to maintain SNAP benefits for 42 million people. Tanzanian President Samia Suluhu Hassan secures over 95% of the vote in a landslide election victory, State TV has reported amid an ongoing internet blackout. The result comes after days of deadly protests, with the opposition claiming hundreds killed and the UN reporting credible evidence of at least 10 deaths. Hundreds marched through Rio's Villa Cruzeiro favela after a police raid left at least 121 people dead in Brazil's deadliest security operation. Demonstrators blame Governor Claudio Castro and call for his resignation as residents accuse police of executions following the assault. President Donald Trump designates Nigeria as a country of particular concern over religious freedom violations, opening the door to possible sanctions. Trump claims Christians face an existential threat, while Nigeria denies the allegations. Okay, we start this hour in Europe, and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has vowed to halt Russian offensives across the country, including fierce assaults in Pobrovsk and Kupiansk. In a video address, Zelensky has said Russia seeks to turn all of Ukraine into destroyed cities like Pobrovsk and Kupiansk, and said that Ukrainian forces must stop them where they have come. Let's take a listen in to his statement.
Багато сьогодні було доповідей військових детально по фронту, звісно, Покровськ. Передусім, ми продовжуємо знищувати окупанта, і це найважливіше – зупиняти російські удари, як це можливо, і там, де це можливо. Росіяни всю нашу країну хочуть перетворити на те, що вони роблять з Покровськом, роблять з Куп'янськом, іншими нашими містами, нашими громадами. Зупиняти їх треба там, куди вони прийшли. І знищувати там. Я дякую кожному нашому підрозділу, кожному солдату, сержанту та офіцеру, які захищають позиції та захищають нашу державу.
Now, Ukraine's top commander has said that troops are intensifying defenses around the strategic hub of Pobrovsk to secure supply routes and push back Russian infiltration. Russian forces have been advancing towards Pobrovsk in the Donetsk region for over a year, seeking to consolidate control over eastern Ukraine and push into neighbouring the Dnipropetrovsk region. We now are joined by Gilbert Doctorow. He is a Russia affairs expert and he joins us live from St. Petersburg in Russia. Okay, let's start with the Vladimir Zelensky statement that we just heard. Gilbert. Of course, Zelensky describes the fighting in Pobrovsk and Kupiansk and says Russia is turning Ukraine into destroyed cities. Now, of course, Russia pictures his war as liberating the country of Ukraine. How would you respond to the claim that Russia's operations in these areas are liberating rather than coercive?
Well, they are very destructive, of course. But the important thing to note is how this is proceeding over a long period of time. They have not staged, the Russians have not staged any massive assaults on major defended cities like Pakrovsk. They have encircled them. In the case of the latest news, they say that they have completely encircled Pakrovsk. And the remarks by Zelensky are an attempt to counter the image of a city where 5,000 or more of its soldiers are facing slaughter as they are surrounded. The fact is that the war is dominated by the move to drones. Mr. Zelensky is unable to resist the Russian advances with manpower. He is short of manpower in many of the critical points of the more than 1,500 kilometer long line of confrontation. Pakrovsk is one of them. But what we see, what I see, watching the Russian state news reports from the front and interviews with soldiers at the front, is that the Ukrainians are trying to prevent Russian advance, not by putting soldiers on the ground, because they are short of soldiers, but by using very intensive drone attacks on the advancing Russian forces. In fact, as a result of the ever-present birdies, as they call them, Russian forces are using small units, not whole front lines of advance. And this is a peculiarity of the present stage of the war, that there are 5, 6, 8 soldiers forming an attack unit, not a whole brigade. The effectiveness of the drone counterattacks is considerable. Let us not underestimate it. Nonetheless, it remains true that the Ukrainian forces are surrounded, and that Mr. Putin is satisfied that this is so, and has invited Western media, Western press, to come and see for themselves.
Gilbert, assuming Russia eventually controls Pakrovsk, what is the vision for the area? Full integration into Russia, autonomy under Russian patronage, or something else possibly?
Well, let's look at the borders. We're speaking now of a fortified town, part of the effort of the Ukrainians to have a series of retreating points as they have been pushed back by the Russians. But this is not the whole of Ukraine. This is an important city in the oblast or province of Donetsk. Donetsk is one of two oblasts or provinces that constitute the so-called Donbass, a largely military, a largely industrial base that was predominantly Russian populated when it was first incorporated into Ukraine shortly after the Russian Revolution of 1917. So this is a Russian-speaking part of Ukraine, which was being subjected to very harsh discrimination of the Ukrainian nationalists who took power in 2014. It is not the whole of Ukraine. And the Russian advance from Pakrovsk will be to the next 2 points of fallback for the Ukrainians, which are Kramatorsk and Slavyansk. These names may not mean very much to the broad audience, but I'd like to point out an important fact. They are about halfway or 2/3 of the way towards the river Dnieper in the oblast of Donetsk. And they were, in 2014, what is called the cradle of the Renaissance of Russian nationalism. They stood for, I forget, 85 days, I think, these little towns with just local militia. They stood up against the Ukrainian army in what the Russians could describe as their version of the last stand of the Alamo. This is a term that has great significance to any American viewers of this program. It was a show of heroism in a hopeless cause. In fact, the objective of the Russians is to return to Kramatorsk and Slavyansk, from which there is a clean sweep straight to the Dnieper River and to the reconquest or conquest of the entire Donbass.
Yes. Yes, Gilbert Doctorow, thank you very much for that insight and for joining us and taking the time here on NewsX World. And of course, you can follow us here on the channel for all your Russia-Ukraine updates. But next, we move over to North America for our next update. And US President Donald Trump has said the United States and Canada will not restart trade talks. This comes a week after he called off trade negotiations with the country over an advertisement aired by the Canadian province of Ontario. Let's take a listen in to what Trump said.
Oh, but I have a very good relationship. I like him a lot. But you know what they did was wrong. He was very nice. He apologized for what they did with the commercial. Because it was a false commercial. You know, it was the exact opposite. Ronald Reagan loved tariffs. And they tried to make it look the other way. And he did apologize, and I appreciated it. We had a great dinner, you know, with other countries, as you know. And I think we have a very good relationship personally. I think that what they did was wrong, but he apologized.
Meanwhile, Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney agreed to visit China after meeting Chinese President Xi Jinping on the sidelines of the APEC summit. Carney has also warned that the era of the rules-based trade is over and that Canada would expand trade beyond the United States. Okay, we're now joined by Shruti Dasgupta. She's an international affairs expert and she joins us live from the Indian capital of New Delhi. Shruti, thank you very much. It's always a pleasure talking to you. President Donald Trump has declared that the United States and Canada will not restart trade talks, citing a provincial ad in Ontario as the trigger for such a move. Why do you think this ad prompted such a response from the US government? Canada, one of the United States' most loyal trading partners. The trade negotiations are done. What are your thoughts?
Greetings, Thomas. Thank you so much for inviting me. What I understand is this is not just a retaliation against Canada, it is also against the senators that are voting against Trump and his tariff policies in Senate. It's the third time I think they have passed a resolution that shows that state that they do not stand with Trump and his tariff terror. And that kind of, I guess, pinches him because to pass that particular vote, a few of the Republicans have also voted against him. I think there are 4 of them that have voted against him, and which shows that he's losing favor within the Republican Party as well, and people are ready to push back. And this is his way of showing that he still controls the narrative around how trade policies regarding USA needs to be conducted. Also, it kind of feeds into the MAGA system, that is his core voter base, where he is a larger than life figure per se, and if he doesn't want to forgive, the other person has no choice but to continue to stay on his knees and grovel. And despite a decent dinner conversation they had during the APEC summit and Carney apologizing for an advertisement, Trump still continues to hold a grudge. So it's a ego boosting move, I guess, as well as voter base appeasement, as well as a warning to those in the Senate that keep passing resolutions that condemn his tariff policies. Okay, Shruti, of course, the United States' second most prominent trading partner is indeed Canada, and number 1 for Canada is the United States, overwhelmingly dominant with 77% of Canadian exports in 2023 going to the United States. Obviously, we saw that meeting with President Xi Jinping and Mark Carney in South Korea. Carney has now agreed to go to China next year at some point at both leaders' convenience. How might this tariff policy, of course it was announced back in April, but we're still, of course, feeling the effects of it. How might this tariff policy affect trade alliances long-term for the United States, especially, of course, with Canada, one of the United States' long-time major trading partners, the second most
the second most important trading partner in the most powerful economy in the world?
Well, I think it shows that, as you said, the rules-based order is gone. And it also kind of helps the world understand that tariff policies, just by decent negotiations or trying to understand the US point of view of it, would not kind of benefit any nation. Because then they can easily be withdrawn. Any deal can stand cancelled if the ego of MAGA voters as well as Trump is hurt. So this kind of creates volatility in the market as well as in the policies of a nation. You are no longer catering to the needs of USA, you're catering to the ego of one particular human being who has been given the most powerful mandate of being the president of United States and having the popular vote as well as the houses. So it shows people that if you go down to Trump and his policies, he is going to continue to suppress. Canada was one of the first few who came back with a very happy reduction in tariff and a trade deal on the bloc. But lo and behold, just one advertisement and everything's back to square one, and he's refusing to negotiate again, which shows that you cannot depend on Trump and his regime. You have to find alternative ways, alternative markets, and it is why I guess Carney is willing to look towards east, towards China, and probably India as well, to ensure that his nation, although heavily dependent on exporting to USA, has other markets and their access so that it doesn't suffer long term. He will probably try and solve this particular knot in the diplomatic tensions that it has created, but he will also ensure that the basic necessities, needs are met, and his particular market does not go down the spiral every time Trump throws a temper tantrum.
Yes, Shruti Dasgupta, do stay with us as we have further news updates coming our viewers' way. But this time we move to West Asia, where we move, of course, to the defining crisis in the Middle East. And the Red Cross has said that it has transferred partial remains of 3 bodies, reportedly of hostages from Hamas, to Israel. The Red Cross says that the remains have now been taken for identification, and there has been no comment yet from Israel or Hamas on the transfer, and it is unclear if the remains belong to any of the 11 bodies of deceased hostages still being held in the Gaza Strip. Earlier this week, Hamas returned the partial remains of Ophir Sarfati, whose body was recovered by the IDF nearly 2 years prior. So far, Israel has confirmed that Hamas has returned the remains of 17 of the 28 deceased hostages that it had agreed to hand over as part of a United States brokered truce deal with Israel. We're once again joined by Shruti. Shruti, of course, this, as Israel and Hamas exchanges usually are, has been extremely messy. We have seen strikes from Israel after the wrong remains have been handed back on numerous occasions. The Red Cross has of course stated that these hostages and these bodies remains may not be remains of the Israeli hostages that Hamas has said that it will hand over. Of course, you can see problems both sides. How does one go about navigating this, especially given the logistical problems that Hamas is going through in locating the bodies through the rubble, of course, with help from Egypt, but of course, Israel dealing with those grieving families who are expecting the remains of their loved ones back?
Well, it's a messy situation, as you have said. There are people waiting to put their grief to bed, to put their loved ones in coffins and see their last remains and last rites conducted, and they are not being given that particular opportunity. So it's heart-wrenching on a human level. Beyond that, if I look at it on a geopolitical term, I see that it is unfortunate that the Red Cross has to deal with a terrorist group, a UN-designated terrorist group, and those people are running them around with a ring around their nose. maybe this body is an Israeli, maybe it is not. So they're just handing over bodies which may not be Israeli, and whatever condition they are in, Israel has to go through an entire post-mortem scenario to find out whether it is part of the original 200 some hostages that were held by Hamas. So that in itself is very difficult for any human being to understand and hope for. Beyond that, there are unconfirmed videos of satellite and drone videos that are showing that probably these bodies are just being dragged out from random places and then buried and then asked to be rediscovered by Red Cross team via Hamas. So those particular videos add to level of uncertainty of authenticity of intent by Hamas and its workers. It is sad that Israel has to bomb people to get their dead back, to get their hostages back. And it is even worse that the pandering to the needs of Palestine and Gaza has led to pandering to the needs of Hamas. And that is a very big moral question that the world has to answer in response to what they see in terms of the trade of these dead bodies and how they are being handled and how the entire situation is unfolding. If you put yourself in those boots of those parents who have waited for years and then still find that the body handed over in the name of their child is not exactly their child or may not be their child, is something that is so deeply hurting that it will be difficult to forgive Hamas for what they have done in the name of claiming Palestine.
Well, yes, and Shruti, of course, this US brokered ceasefire has been fragile, to put it lightly, but it is still holding, as it seems. How would you assess the stability of it, given that Israel, of course, as you have stated, has conducted multiple strikes, although, of course, not at the same level as prior to the ceasefire? And, of course, the messiness, as we've spoken about, Hamas reclaiming these bodies from the rubble.
But I hope the ceasefire holds at whatever level it is holding now. It's just a random bombing across the yellow zones that have been declared to ensure that the Hamas operatives don't take opportunity in this temporary ceasefire that is currently holding and create a new problem for the world or a cause for Israel to accelerate their aggressions in Gaza. Because ultimately, no matter what happens, if a small incursion is even planned, Israel will have no choice but to go all out and wipe out whatever is left in Gaza and then stand accused of human rights violation by the whole world. So it's a very difficult situation. Both the peacekeeping forces, the Red Cross, even USA finds themselves in, because they have to find a middle ground with a group of terrorists which may or may not be willing to walk the line of moral and ethical values. And hopefully Israel is holding its side. It is bombing. I believe the latest report claimed that in Khan Yunis area about 40 odd people were injured in the bombings that had happened. But this at least is better than outright continuous bombing and elimination of people and buildings in that zone. So if Hamas holds its side, maybe there is a chance for people of Gaza, because at least without it, if they do not hold their side, there is no future. So I hope the peace holds no matter how messy it is, and I hope there is closure at the end for both sides.
Yes, Shruti Dasgupta, thank you very much for joining us here on the programme. It's always a pleasure to get your insight on these matters. We now move over to the African continent, and Tanzanian President Samia Suluhu Hassan has won a landslide election victory with 97.66% of the vote, the Electoral Commission has announced today. She received over 31.9 million of the 32.6 million votes cast. That is according to the Tanzanian state media, of course. And the elections, which barred two major opposition figures, sparked violent protests across the country. According to the spokesperson of the Chadema opposition party, at least 700 people have been killed, while Amnesty International reports says at least 100 have died. Authorities have imposed curfews and deployed the army in the country. Dar es Salaam, Mwanza Arusha have been engulfed in chaos with gunfire, tear gas and burning vehicles in the streets. The United Nations has urged security forces to avoid excessive force. The government says it is acting to maintain peace and protect property amid one of the deadliest demonstrations in recent history. This is what the Tanzanian foreign minister said on the violence.
Whatever means of force that has been used is just the level of protecting force. None of the excessive force has been used. And a country cannot use excessive force against its own citizens, for sure.
Now, finally, we turn to Europe. And in Serbia, thousands of young protesters are marching across the country to mark 1 year since a deadly train station collapse, an accident that killed 16 people and ignited the largest anti-government movement in decades. Students began their 90-kilometre march from Belgrade towards the northern city of Novi Sad, where tens of thousands are expected to rally and, of course, where the accident happened. Protesters are calling for accountability, saying no one has been held responsible a year after the tragedy. The protests have evolved into a broader movement against President Alexander Vučić, with demonstrators accusing his government of corruption and authoritarianism. Authorities have charged 13 people over the collapse, including a former transport minister, but no trial date has so far been set. Let's in fact listen in to some of the protesters.
Sjajno, došao sam da se poklonim trenutno najjačoj svetskoj sili. To su naši studenti, naša omladina I osjećam se nepobjedivo.
Da smo svi postali jedno srce. Eto to, ja to tako osjećam. I večeras se osjećam veličanstvenim. Dugo se čekalo, ovo vidite koje sam ja godište. Iz 53. 72.
Svi je red, ali mislim da mi objektivno nas prati jedna savest, jedna veoma dobra savest koje mi zapravo delujemo ovako da dovedemo konačno I pravdu I bolje sutra ovoj zemlji.
Moving on, a Turkish court has sentenced 11 people to life in prison over a hotel fire that killed 78 people at a ski resort in Turkey's Bolu Mountains in January. Among those convicted were Halit Ergil, the owner of the Grand Kartal Hotel, his wife, 2 daughters, and the hotel's general manager. The blaze had broke out overnight on January the 21st in the hotel's restaurant, rapidly engulfing the 12-story building, which was fully booked with holidaymakers. 34 children are believed to be among the dead, and more than 130 guests were injured as many jumped from windows to escape. The court also sentenced Bolu's deputy mayor and a board member of the company that owned the hotel. In total, the defendants received 34 aggravated life sentences for the children killed. The fire had prompted nationwide outrage after survivors said no fire alarms sounded and authorities were accused of failing to enforce safety standards. Well, that's all that we have time for this hour. Keep watching NewsX World for more news updates.